Dr. Carole, I suppose the kickoff news of the morning is incredible bumper employment labor numbers out of the US yesterday, indicating further rate rises. Should the oil markets care that we're possibly going into even further tightening by the G7 central banks?
Good morning, Sean. Good morning, everyone. I'm actually joining you from Warsaw in Poland.
Okay.
Well, let's look at a little bit at oil markets from distance. So we know that there is a supply, there's the demand side that are driving it. And on the demand side, one of the key factors has been the macroeconomic outlook, which has been to a large extent dictated by the rate policies, particularly in major economy, the largest economy in the world, that is the US. Now, everybody kind of celebrated when the Fed announced a pause to interest rate, but it wasn't just the data of the labor market that came out yesterday that signaled a higher interest rate, but perhaps to come. But also when you looked at the Federal Reserve's meeting notes, we could see that there is a strong appetite for a continuation of the rate hikes after a temporary pause. So that's what kind of dominated the market sentiment over the last few days. Add to that the data from China, another macroeconomic factor, where the service sector, yes, it grew, but not as expected. So it was rather disappointing because people were expecting a faster growth. And then so that is these are the two main factors on the demand side. And on the supply side, of course, we have the Saudi announcement of extending the cuts by another month, the Russian production also to be cut by a further 500,000 barrels a day. Also, Algeria, I think, announced some very tiny cuts. So these forces are acting together to drive the market today. But don't forget, there's also non-OPEC supply that people tend to forget about, with the US signaling or showing a higher growth for this year. So the rate on its own, the labor market on its own, is not the only driver, but it's definitely an important driver going forward.
The other big sort of story I felt taking away from OPEC meeting this week, I wanted to get your views on, was the encouragement from the traditional OPEC members that to grow OPEC plus even further. There was a sort of any question marks that may emerge between the sort of a media narrative, oh, Russia and Saudi are having problems in the relationship and so forth. No, it was the opposite. This OPEC plus is very, very firm, and they want to grow it, and they were encouraging whatever other countries were present or not present to join, and that the fact that together they can have obviously a greater weight and muscle on the international energy markets. Your thoughts on an ever-growing OPEC plus as a cohesive force and its relevance for energy markets going forward?
Before I answer that question, I want to go back to what you mentioned earlier, Sean, about the wolf hasn't arrived. Well, if it's not about everybody being in a recession, it's about the growth rate, right? What the expectations were. And don't forget, many people were talking about a booming second half of the year and a tight market. This has not happened because we're talking about different speed. And if we did not have a slowdown in economic activity, or at least a growth which was not as expected, why are prices where they are today, despite the massive cuts that we have seen from OPEC? So we have to be careful here about the income effect of a recession. And there is also the other factor that affects demand that we call price effect. Demand responds to high prices, but with a time lag because of the elasticity. So that's what I wanted to highlight. In terms of
on that point, Carole, just to come back to it, one of the comments that were being made this week was the idea of, because that was a very big point, a big talking point in the meeting in Vienna, was why haven't markets reacted to these cuts? And one of the sort of more dominant answers was, well, this market reacts to show me, not tell me. So tell me you're going to cut, I'm not reacting, but show me the cuts, let me feel them, and the market will react. And the point there being that the market's not seeing or feeling, particularly the Russian cuts, but of course the Saudi cuts are only starting this month and continuing. What's your thoughts on that show me, don't tell me reaction of the market at the moment?
Well, show me, don't tell me about the Russian. I don't know whether we can see anything because really data on Russia
Right.
more and more opaque. And I think we're all engaged in guesswork because we don't know where that oil is going and how it is going. So there's definitely some opacity around Russia. And Russia has a history of promising but not delivering. But the Gulf countries, including Saudi Arabia, and primarily Saudi Arabia, they deliver. But to go back to the point of beyond show me, not tell me, there is also non-OPEC supply coming to the market. And even within OPEC, if you look at Iran, for example, they are not doing that bad despite the sanctions. Actually, there is more oil coming to the market. So that's why I would find it very simplistic to only reduce the development to oil markets to just what OPEC has announced. Now, on the interesting question of growing OPEC,
yes,
I was thinking about it, but I didn't have the chance yet because I was traveling yesterday to look at the top producers. But really, if you want to have a big influence on the oil market, more than what you currently have, you want to bring on board the big producers. And who is the other really big producer who has the same might as Saudi Arabia and Russia? That is the US. Do you really think the US is going to join OPEC Plus? I don't think so. The other is, yes, you can grow, you can bring.
But on that point though, which was interesting, obviously the U.S. government won't join OPEC Plus. But what does strike me increasingly, Carole, is the proximity that the international industry is in alignment with OPEC Plus. You know, the majors. At the OPEC meeting in Vienna, we had some of the biggest companies in the world and some of the smaller ones. So the international majors are sort of walking step in step with OPEC Plus, but in a parallel corridor. They all seem to have similar talking points. You know, we must invest in the future of oil supply in order to ensure that there isn't a massive price spike, etc. They're all sort of sharing the same talking points.
Of course, because they are all sharing the same benefit of higher prices. They want to be in business for a long time. Don't forget, what was the first cartel in the oil industry? It was the Seven Sisters cartel, the oil companies that we know today, the oil majors. They were the one who collided and tried to control supply to achieve certain price level. And their own governments also benefit. And I'm not talking also about just producing governments. I'm thinking about also the major consuming countries where they impose high taxes on the oil industry. So again, it's a very complicated scene that we cannot just pinpoint at OPEC what they are doing, what they are not doing. There is a whole chain of actors who benefit from that. Think of the windfall taxes that were introduced across Europe. In almost every single European country, a new windfall tax on energy companies was introduced to benefit from these high taxes. So I'm not surprised that the industry, the oil majors, the privately owned oil majors, the Exxons of this world, the BPs of this world, are singing the same song as OPEC because they all want to see they are in business for many years to come, many decades to come, because they are facing the same challenge. That is the energy transition. And you want to give your most valuable asset the longest shelf life, because renewable energy does not generate economic rent. Oil generates economic rent.
What do you think will be bigger factors for the energy markets to keep an eye on as you're lying on the beach?
Oh, I'm looking forward to that. I'll be actually running in the forest, in the Black Forest, no beaches there. But I would keep my eyes really on the macroeconomic indicators. That is for me the biggest factor, primarily in the US, in China, because they are the two largest economies, and the EU, because they are the largest economic bloc. So this is where I would watch closely, because I know everything else will adjust. I mean, it's easy to read in terms of, for example, non-OPEC supply or OPEC supply, what will happen next. But the macroeconomic, as you see from this podcast, Sean, there are so many variables. And you say, okay, this is happening, but the other is not happening. But in reality, in economics, especially when it comes to policy, whether monetary or fiscal, there is always a lagged effect. You know, so there's time difference between the announcement of a policy, its implementation, and the effect. It will take time for the effects to be visible, and that's where I will keep my focus on.